My name is Pastor Daniel, and I'm joined with Dr. Keith Peters, the senior pastor at this church. Now, last week you talked about graduation. How is this week going to be similar or different from last week?
Well, last week was basically an honoring of our graduates, and that led me towards the reality of what are they facing. And the reality is graduates from 2021 are facing much more treacherous and dangerous times than graduates from 2001 or 20 years before.
Yeah.
And part of that is because the waters in which they're wading into, using one analogy, have just become so murky with confusion. Instant information in this internet age and mass media age have not really brought clarity. It's brought more confusion. So over the overall theme that we've been looking at for the last number of months about our spiritual journey, I'm going to take a little bit of time over the next couple of weeks to address the darkness and drift of deceit. There's a concept called gaslighting that it borrows the phrase from back in the days where people used gas to light their homes, and they would adjust the flame. And you could adjust the flame down, and the people who don't know you're adjusting it down, the lights just get a little dimmer and a little dimmer, and you really can't see very clearly. And that phrase gives people the idea, or carries with it the idea of someone messing with the lights. And those who think they see something are then ridiculed because everybody else, it's fine. And that's what I believe we're seeing in our culture. There has been an intentional gaslighting, adjusting, adapting, dimming the lights. Now, I'm not a particular conspiracy theorist and when it comes to a particular group or organization, but I'm a biblicist, and the Bible says the God of this world blinds minds. And he does that not with flagrant darkness, but with dimness. It's like the frog in the kettle. You know, you throw a frog in a boiling pot of water, he'll jump out. You put him in a pot of cold water and slowly turn it up, and you'll cook him. And I believe we're cooking the truth out of our culture.
Yeah, exactly. And most things, once they've gone far enough along, the growth seems to be less exponential, and then you don't notice it as much. You talked about, I think, last week, how a tree, you might notice a tree growing from a little seed to a 4-foot tree, but once it's 30 feet tall and it's growing a couple of feet each year or something like that, you don't really notice a couple of feet.
Well, the irony is it actually grows faster 30 years down, but it's not as noticeable. The exponential concept, whether it's in accrued interest or national debt or the Fed printing money, it's going up exponentially. It's going up so fast that I think recently people are starting to take notice. But for instance, several examples of this, way back in the, early 80s, I think, a Democratic presidential nominee was campaigning, and they found that he had had an affair. So they immediately dropped him, the Democratic. And then their next candidate, the next cycle around, was Bill Clinton. And yet it wasn't a problem just, 8 years later, or 4 years, however many years later it was. Another example of this is when Barack Obama was campaigning back in the,
2004, I think.
Yeah, what's that?
2004.
Whatever it was, he started showing signs of socialism. I remember Joe the plumber, and we just need to spread the wealth around. And that there was kind of an immediate socialism. Of course, he backed it up and he denied it, but look at us now. Democratic socialist is where we are even proudly naming many of the Democratic Party. We are Democratic socialists. So it's like, for a while, people don't notice it, and then when they do, when it is exposed, then there's a reaction, but we get used to it. We adapt, we adjust, and before we know it, things have changed so drastically that our values are no longer recognizable.
Yeah, well, I was reminded recently there's a celebrity who came out as, apparently she was lesbian for a long time, and then recently she came out as transgender, so now she's not a lesbian, she's a straight transgender man or something like that. And anyways, I'm thinking, whatever. I mean, yeah, of course, it matters. but I don't know this person. This person's never going to come in contact with me. But then apparently, because society has so accepted this transgender movement, this girl, biological girl, takes off her shirt and just wears shorts outside. And I guess she had breast reduction or something like that. But in reality, it's still a woman. These are still women parts. And she's walking around, and Facebook is blasting it, advertising it. And I'm thinking, is this not pornographic? If I was to see a woman without her shirt on, would that not be considered pornographic? And Facebook should block it. But yet, because this woman says, no, I'm a man.
That's a good example. One of the things I'm going to be focusing on is way back in the late 50s, an FBI agent who had worked under J. Edgar Hoover, his specialty with communism, and he compiled his research in a book called The Naked Communist, and revealed in that book 45 different goals that the communists, he had learned through his studies and through his espionage, what their agenda was, how they were going to undermine America. And he wrote it down in 1958. It got to some immediate attention. In fact, J. Edgar Hoover said, I'm sure that this is going to be overwhelmingly received. It was for a brief time. And then the press turned against it, and McCarthyism got, they portrayed it as ridiculous. So it basically got dropped, and I would dare say 90% of Americans have no idea who he is or what he did. But I recently learned that 44 of the 45 things that he wrote about have happened. And under the current, most people don't realize, one of them was the thing you just mentioned, not only about the morality, but basically just destroy standards of morality was one of their goals. And that has happened since 1958, where now pornography is protected under the First Amendment. It's gotten so bad that even though the Supreme Court finally drew a line and said, well, not child porn, we're gonna limit that, but even that is now under attack. And something as current as Netflix's series this year with Cuties, trying to sexualize 11-year-old girls, and how that was so popular for a while. I think there's been some kickback, but that's the way that you push the margins, you redefine, and people get used to it, and then you turn the temperature up against once people are comfortable. So we're going to be focusing on that, not just for the perspective of so we can say, okay, we've changed. I mean, every rational human being over 30 years old knows America's values have changed. They don't know why, and they don't know to what end, I believe. And the Bible says way back in Psalm 11, if the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? And I think a lot of people, even people who wouldn't identify themselves as perhaps churchgoers or even people of faith, are very concerned about what's happening to the foundational values of America. So we're going to take the next week, maybe the next 2 weeks, to try to understand where did this gaslighting begin and where is it going. And it happens to be the 45th of the 45 things that this guy identified was get the UN to have authority over America domestic policy. And we're already moving in that direction. So what's that about? Why an exterior force controlling government laws? And by the way, defunding the police was one of those things that we're seeing. And I believe it's really just setting the stage for what the Bible tells about in the last days, where there's going to be such a level of control that people will not even be able to buy or sell unless they fall into line with the party agenda, by whatever name that party goes.
Yeah, and you talked about how our values have changed in America and probably around the world. But, I mean, we know that to every effect there is a cause, and the question becomes, the position of America does not change unless something's pushing it in a different direction. And so what exactly changed? What's been pushing this change? Somebody pointed out that language changes so that it evolves over time. And someone said that makes sense, but when you have to try and keep pushing and pushing, that you have to call these gender-neutral people they, them, which that's not how you really use the plural form for they and them, unless it's someone that you don't know their gender or something like that. So for example, if I said, oh, someone left their watch, I hope they come back for it. If I don't know them, but if it's a guy and I say, oh, Joe left a watch, it doesn't make sense. But then people say, oh, well, it's just language. Language is always evolving. Stop making a big deal out of it. But then they keep pushing it. And we can see there's definitely people behind here pushing this agenda, and the question becomes why. If it's supposed to happen naturally, if language evolves naturally, why does it have to be forced on people?
Actually, about that issue, I think it was 1978, there was a study done, and they hired some high-power people. One was a research in psychology, clinical psychology, or some psychology, and the other one was a market expert. And they had them do research, and they basically put together a way in which the gay agenda could change its perception, put a face mask on. And the straightening of, something of Straight America is the name of it. I can't remember it off the top of my head. But the first premise that they came out with is we basically have to get America to look at gender and sexuality and sexual preferences the way they look at ice cream flavors. It doesn't matter.
It's just a preference.
It's a preference. Now think about, that's 1978, I think it was, or maybe 88, but still 30 years ago. That's not how people thought. Today, that is how people think. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of people look at those sexual preferences. It doesn't affect me. It's no big deal. But it will affect us, the bathroom issues, the transport issues, the boys who decide, I feel like a girl today, I'm going to go take a shower with the girls' basketball team. These do have the potential of affecting us or our children.
And I'm sure that they have, but then it doesn't get reported as much. The media doesn't want to cover. For example, if a guy says, I feel like a girl today, goes into the girls' bathroom, or goes into the girls' shower during the locker room, the media doesn't really cover that information, doesn't recover how girls feel violated being in a shower with these other guys and stuff. But then we're told, no, they're fine with it. Well, you don't hear this from the students. Nobody's reporting that.
You'd be hard-pressed to survey a generic survey of teenage girls or junior high girls and say, are you okay taking showers with a strange male or someone with male plumbing? It's interesting, one of the 45 issues, and this is what makes this so remarkable, because this was all spelled out and has been ignored. One of them, the communist goals identified by this guy, was get control of the media. We have to control the narrative in order to accomplish our purposes. Now, whether they have control is debatable, but the very issue you just pointed out indicates that there is an awful lot that the American people are not being informed about if it doesn't go with a certain generally liberal agenda. So when I read, and I've known about this guy for, well, years, decades, I've spoken on it before, but I read an article recently that caught my attention on the 70th anniversary of his book, or something like that, 60 or 70th, 44 of the 45 have come true. That caught my attention. Mm-hmm. I was aware of it, I wrote it down, I knew about it, I've researched it years ago, and just came across that article and I realized, wow, you know, while we were sleeping, their agenda, somebody, and again, I don't know that I'm putting the finger on a particular party, or which, by the way, was one of the agenda, get control of the political parties, or a particular person. But I do believe that Satan, who is the master deceiver, has an agenda, has a plan, and he knows he's stepping up the timetable. Mm-hmm. And there's a reference on the notes, but the topic I'm going to be talking about was introduced back in the 50s, and it's a list of 45 different goals, and that is also available. I encourage you to pick that up along with reading glasses if you want to read that, or you can follow the reference. 2 Timothy chapter 2, please. We closed last week's service with this passage. We opened it with this one. Matthew chapter 6, in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is talking about worry and anxiety. And he said, where your treasure, where your values are, your heart's going to be. But then he says something that seems unrelated, but actually it's at the core of anxiety. The light of the body is the eye. If your eye is single, literally, if it's folded together, if it's operating the way God designed it to operate, you'll be able to see and recognize clearly. Your whole body will be illuminated. What you're reading, what you're seeing, you'll be able to process and recognize it. How many of you know the term gaslighting? The concept of gaslighting is basically changing things, and somebody knows they're changing intentionally, like it's the temperature or a dimmer switch. But the people that are seeing it or experiencing it are not necessarily, they're not aware someone's got their hand on the light switch. But the person with the hand on the light switch say, there's nothing to see here. In fact, the more we become aware at what we're seeing and the more we speak up about what we're seeing, the more the people who are actually dimming the switch saying, you're crazy. There's nothing to see here. Folks, we are seeing an incredible gaslighting, not just recently, but it's been going on for a long time. And because there are people who are dimming our ability to see, the principle here is all the more valid. If you're seeing clearly, you'll be able to accurately assess what you're seeing. But if your eye is evil, the Greek word there in the New Testament, Greek in which the New Testament is written, is poneros. It means hurtful or diseased. In other words, if either someone's twisting what you're saying or there's something twisted inside that is not folded together accurately, call it your moral compass, if you will. If there's something inside that's affecting your ability to actually recognize what you're seeing, then your whole body will be full of darkness. And if the light, what you think is truth, if the light that is in you is darkness, then how great is that darkness? And then, of course, he says, no man can serve two masters. The Bible talks about two masters in John 10. Jesus said, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd gives his life for the sheep, but there's a thief out there who comes to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and more abundantly. Colossians 2 says, be rooted and grounded in your faith, and beware, be on guard, lest anyone spoil you through philosophy. Philosophy is literally the love of wisdom. That's what the word means. Through philosophy and vain deceit, after the traditions of this world, after the rudiments of this world, and not after Christ. Compasses are designed to, for I don't know how long compasses have been around, perhaps 1,000 years or more, but they're designed to always let us know where north is. And if we know where north is, we can relatively figure out what direction we're going, or if we know what direction we want to end up, or whether it's east, south, west, or north, the compass allows us to navigate, giving us a fixed reference point. When we learned last week that the compass is really not fixed. It doesn't point to true north. It points to magnetic north, which moves about 25 miles a year. It vacillates based on the core of the earth. And I mentioned last week, the reality is magnetic north is currently shifting towards Russia. And I use that as an analogy that in much the same way, our understanding of what is right or wrong, what the Bible calls wisdom, but it warns us, but there's wisdom. There's true north, true wisdom, the wisdom that is from above, and there's the world wisdom. And anybody that's been alive probably longer than 30 years has recognized the world's concept of right and wrong is changing. Just as magnetic north shifts, and therefore our compasses are really not giving us a completely accurate picture of north, so our value system, our world's concept of wisdom or right or wrong is shifting as well. And ironically, it's shifting away from true wisdom, away from true historic American values, and frankly shifting more towards the values that would be more reflective of China or Russia, communist countries. Have you not found it ironic? I know until very recently you couldn't even say on social media that it was the Wuhan virus. You'd get shut down. I guess Facebook has Facebook has accomplished whatever their purpose was, because now they're letting people post that because there's so much evidence of where it came from. But for almost a year, it's been politically incorrect. Remember when President Trump mentioned the Wuhan virus? He was called xenophobic and false and a liar. But the reality is, isn't it strange that 13 months after that hit America's shores, America looks an awful lot like China when it comes to government control and government mandates? We're shifting in that direction. We're moving towards an anti-God, pro-government direction. This shift, however, has been persistent, predicted, and intentional, and may I add, aggressive. Like gaslighting, it wasn't very aggressive for the first 100 years or so. And along the path, there have been people who stood up and tried to say, wait a minute, look at the man behind the curtain. Somebody's feeding you fake news or misinformation. And generally, America reacts to that, oh no, and then America does what? Goes back to sleep. Remember the partial birth abortion issue 20 years ago? When people started to understand what was involved. I mean, a baby is born, the head is out, you stick a needle in the back of the head, you suck the brains out. Now that's a gross description, but that's an accurate description. It had been going on for a long time. Most Americans didn't know it. When they knew it, what happened? Oh no! But then what's happening now? Partial birth abortions again. Remember just a few years ago when Project Veritas got a recording of Planned Parenthood selling aborted baby parts? How many of you remember that? How many of you felt disgusted by that? Guess what President Biden just approved? Fetal tissue research again. You see, every once in a while, the light will be turned on. A reasonable American person will say, wow, I didn't know that was going on. But we get distracted, we get back to our lives, and the march towards anti-God, anti-life, anti-family, anti-America continues. 2 Timothy chapter 3, the Spirit speaketh expressly, or this, that's 1 Timothy chapter 4. This know also, that in the last days, perilous times shall come. Going to get harder is what God is warning us. Men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection. Skip down to verse 7. Ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, as Jannes and Jambres, those are the two who withstood Moses. They were in Pharaoh's courts. They were the magicians who withstood Moses, kept talking Pharaoh into there's nothing to see here. As Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. Skip down to verse 12. Yea, and all that will live godly in Christ Jesus shall suffer persecution, but evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived. Now, the reality is this is written 2,000 years ago, and it existed 2,000 years ago. And the reference to Jannes Jambres would have been 4,000 years ago, actually almost 5,000 years ago, and it would existed there. Because there is a devil and there is a God. And they are both, for lack of a better term, competing for our allegiance. So this is this idea of evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse. It's been going on for thousands of years, in fact, since the dawn of history. But this passage implies the pace at which they deceive is going to get greater. I'm going to give you just a rapid overview of what has happened, some major events that have been instrumental in gaslighting America culture. 1948, the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx. Does anyone know what Karl Marx was studying to be before he developed this concept? He was studying to be a pastor. If I remember history correctly, Karl Marx was raised Lutheran. Raised Jewish. His family moved to Germany, which was predominantly Lutheran. When Karl, at the age of 12 and 13, was going through his bar mitzvah, he was kind of committed to his faith, Jewish faith. Then his father came home and announced, we're Lutherans now. Karl said, but Papa, why? His father said, we're in Germany now, it's good for business. That was Karl Marx's introduction to how religion can be used to manipulate people. And he's the one, I believe, who said religion is the opiate of the masses. 1869, Charles Darwin. He also was studying for the ministry at one point. Wrote The Origin of the Species, introducing the concept of the theory of evolution. 1920, the formation of the ACLU. You say, Pastor, what's this got to do with it? Roger Baldwin was a communist, an avowed communist, proud of it. It wasn't until much later in his life when that got exposed that he recanted that. But the ACLU was founded by someone who believed Marxist principles. 1925, Scope's monkey trial. Remember the challenge in a little town of Tennessee about a substitute teacher who wasn't even supposed to be talking about biology, decided to talk about Charles Darwin? That was a setup. It was intentional. He was planted to do just that by the ACLU. And then the media moved in and turned it into a monkey trial to illustrate how unfair these Bible-believing teachers are, where they're so afraid of alternate views that they won't even give evolution a chance. That was just the whole purpose. Unfair, unfair, unfair. What happened next? Well, then the Humanist Manifesto, led by John Dewey, by the way. Who is John Dewey? He is called the father of what? American education. He was an atheist. Both he and Roger Baldwin did studies in China and Russia to understand educational principles. And then he taught it in America through Columbia University. 1962, the first point of the Humanist Manifesto is there's no God. We're God. We're all there is. 1962, that would be about, well, less than 40 years after the Scopes monkey trial that decided it was unfair just to teach creation. Within one generation, it's illegal to teach creation. What happened to fairness? It accomplished what the purpose it was accomplished. Now we don't want fairness. Now we don't want to expose America to the idea that there might be a God. Why? Because for over 100 years, there have been people gaslighting America. All of these have one common denominator, and that is a denial and dethronement of God. The first requisite for the happiness of people is the abolition of religion, Karl Marx. We must replace individualism with collectivism, communism, without society knowing it, Vladimir Lenin. We cannot expect the Americans to jump from capitalism to communism, but we can feed them small doses of socialism until they wake up and find they're now communists. Nikita Khrushchev. Your children's children will live under communism. That's what Nikita Khrushchev said in the 50s. Your children's children will live under communism. You Americans are so gullible, you won't accept communism outright. Why? But notice what he said. We will keep feeding you small doses of socialism until you will finally wake up and find you already have communism. We will not have to fight you. We will so weaken your economy until you will fall like overripe fruit. The democracy will cease to exist when you take away from those who are willing to work and give to those who would not. This was 60 some odd years ago when he said that. I read an article this morning. I didn't look for it. I opened my email, and there it was. Why do empires collapse? And it gives an outline of the stimulus packages that's gone up. Talks about what happened. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. The U.S. labor force participation rate hit 67% in 2000. I don't even remember the what do you call it when the economy tanks, 2000? Recession. Labor participation rate, that means adult people who are eligible to work, only 67% of them were working in 2000. This year, there are about 260 million adults in America, but according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, only 151 million are employed. That means there's 100 million Americans. He calls them zombies, by the way. 100 million Americans, meaning the labor participation rate is even lower today. Here's another quick quote. In 2000, state, local, and federal governments together, the biggest source of zombieism, according to him, spent an amount equal to 34% of the gross domestic product. That means $1 out of every $3 created in America was spent on government. 34%. That was in 2000. Today, the number is 44%. Now, you understand, state, and we need state, local, and federal government. They're legitimate. Maybe all that they do are not legitimate, but they're legitimate. But that means 44% of every dollar. If 44% of all the money is spent by state and local and federal governments who make no money, right? Because where do they get their money? Come on, think with me. This is not school. This is church. You're supposed to think. You'll get that eventually. That means 44% of the money that is spent by people who make no money, which means 56% of the working people in America are supporting 44%. And that's government workers. That is not talking about welfare. That is not talking about the extra stimulus money that's keeping people from wanting to get a job. Interesting article. What I find more interesting, and Khrushchev said this is going to happen 65 years ago, and we're watching it happen in our generation. 1958, FBI agent Cleo Skousen worked for J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI. He came up with the book after doing exhaustive research, and he called that book The Naked Communist. In other words, what he's trying to do, you remember the story, The Emperor Has No Clothes? He's trying to remove the covering. He's trying to pull the curtain back. And this is just one topic, and his specialty was communism. And he wrote, communists possess the fortitude and knowledge to slowly re-engineer society. In other words, he said in 1958, that's what they're about. That's what they're trying to do, is re-engineer our society. In 1963, this list that I printed for you and he wrote about became a part of the congressional record, so it was discussed and debated on Congress. J. Edgar Hoover, who wrote about this book, I feel certain that your efforts on this important subject will receive widespread attention and consideration. Ronald Reagan, 40 years later, said no one is better qualified to discuss the threat to this nation from communism. You will be alarmed, you will be informed, you will be glad you heard him. How many remember Paul Hardy, the rest of the story? Very popular, right? His syndication reached all over the world. I have never given any volume such an unqualified endorsement. Pretty significant people. So how come if I asked 1,000 high school graduates about this, 940 would know nothing about it? I mean, if it was such an important document a generation ago, how come this generation does not know it exists? It is essential that we educate the educator so we can control how they educate others. Remember, right after 1958, in the late 50s and the 60s, all of the investigations, what were they called? Mccarthyism. What were students taught about Senator McCarthy? He's a lunatic. He's a conspiracy theorist. You can't trust him. Communists' most vital tool, this is a quote, is the media. We'll get there in a moment. But you see, the reason we don't know about this, it was immediately reacted to. There were Senate and House hearings on some things. I'll get there in a moment. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But the reality is, it was portrayed by the media and in school as ridiculous. There's nothing to see here. And therefore, anyone that was educated in the 60s, when they think about McCarthyism, do they think positive or negative? Why? Because that's how the media displayed it. And that's how many teachers presented it. The Naked Communist lays out the whole progressive plan. It is unbelievable how fast it's been achieved. That was Dr. Ben Carson. I mentioned in brief last week, over the last 62 years, 44 of the 45 goals that he wrote about have become part of American society. I'm not going to go over all of these goals. Time would not allow me, but I'm going to race through a few of them. Remember how Khrushchev said, "We will feed you socialism until you wake up communist." There is little difference between socialism and communism. Anyone want to guess who made this reference? Both control resources without private enterprise. They shut down businesses, they shut down schools, they shut down churches, they arbitrarily shut down jobs by shutting off pipelines. In both, government has the first and last say on everything. How many of you remember when Barack Obama was first running for president and Joe the Plumber? Anyone remember Joe the Plumber? Joe the Plumber got a lot of PR. What was the question Joe the Plumber asked generally Barack Obama, candidate Obama, about his tax plan? And Joe the Plumber said, I'm a small businessman. You know, I'm just starting to get ahead, and I have to pay all these bills and all of these taxes and all of these, government mandates. President Obama's unscripted answer was, well, we have to spread the wealth around. Do you remember the immediate kickback that was in America? That's socialism. Do you remember that? Come on, it hadn't been that long ago. Well, what do we have now? We have democratic socialists running our House, our Senate, and our White House. And it was President Obama who said there's very little difference between socialism and communism. In his book, which, by the way, came out before we elected him, Dreams of My Father, this is a quote, I chose my friends carefully. The more politically active, black students, the foreign students, the Chicanos, the Marxist professors, and the structural feminists. After college, he wrote, he would visit the East Village for what he called the socialist conferences I attended at Cooper Union. This was out there, but the media did not vet President Obama. Many people didn't understand his leanings at that time. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to point out a few of them. The fourth goal that he revealed is free trade between all nations, regardless of communist affiliation, whether or not items would be used for war. Most of us would be shocked at how much money we're giving Iran, Iraq, China through our trade negotiations. We are funding people who are trying to destroy us. We weren't doing that in 1958. We are doing it now. Provide American aid to nations regardless of communist domination. Same concept. Grant recognition of Red China and admission to Red China in the UN. Red China and Russia now serve on the UN Security Council and have veto power over any decision. Capture one or both of the political parties in the United States. This is 1958. I'm not beating up on the Democrats. I'm just stating facts. That's why I'm putting references. The Democratic Party tried to remove any reference to God in their platform in 2012. They tried to do it. No reference to God in the entire party platform. In 2012, there was a kickback, so they finally added a reference to our God-given potential. The only reference God in the 2012 platform. 2008, 2012, 2020 platform has only that kind of reference to God one time. I watched, and I don't watch party things, but I did watch I think it was the 2000, I want to say it was the 2000, no, it was the 2012. It was the 2012 platform. I watched, and you can Google this, I think it was 2012, and the moderator was adding this God-given potential. They wanted to add a reference to God. If you watch, it may still be on YouTube, that's how I saw it. You watch it. Watch the reaction from the floor. The motion is made to add a reference to God-given potential. There was a roar. No! You can listen to it if they hadn't been polled. And then the moderator said, the ayes have it. Get control. This is not me. This is the goals that were identified after exhaustive research in espionage and communism. Get control of the school system. Quote, use them as a transmission belt for socialism and current communistic propaganda. Soften the curriculum. Get controls of the Teachers Association. Put the party line in the textbooks. Remember what Marx said? It is essential that we educate the educator so we can control how they educate others. Folks, we have a lot of teachers in this church. I think we have one of the best school systems in the country, but we are an exception. Abraham Lincoln wrote, the philosophy for the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. So how do they accomplish this? Remember I referenced the Humanist Manifesto? One of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto, and by the way, 18 of them were professors. Education is a most powerful ally of humanism. In other words, dethrone God, elevate man. And every American school is a school of humanism. This is in 1933. This is their dream. This is their wish list. What can a theistic Sunday schools meeting for an hour once a week and teaching only a fraction of the children do to stem the tide of a 5-day program of humanistic teaching? You say, preacher, you're making that up. No, I'm not. They put it in writing. That's how confident they were of their agenda. 1983, I think that may be Humanist Manifesto too. The battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity. Utilizing a classroom instead of a pulpit to carry humanistic values into wherever they teach. I'm not trying to blacklist teachers. I love teachers. I love teaching. If I weren't a pastor, I would want to be a teacher. Those of you who sat under my ministry probably wish I were a teacher somewhere else. But what if what I'm teaching is not true? There have been teachers who have fired because they misspoke and called a transgendered person by their biological sex, and they've gotten fired for doing that. 18, gain control of all student newspapers. Use student riots to foment, this is 1958, student riots to foment public protest against programs or organizations that are under communist attack. Do you notice who sponsors that particular riot? ACLU. Infiltrate the press. Get control of book review assignments, editorial writing, policy-making decisions. Gain control of key positions in radio, TV, and Hollywood. Guess who just bought MGM, by the way? Is it MGM he just bought? Who? Bezos, is that his name? Why? Isn't it enough that he controls social media? Why? Because there's a reason behind it. Continuing discrediting American culture by degrading all form of artistic expression. I don't mean to insult the artist today, but has art changed in the last 50 years? Control art critics and directors of museums. Promote, quote, promote ugliness, repulsive, meaningless art. I hesitate to mention this. This is art, what you're seeing. You know what you're actually seeing? You're seeing someone who dropped a crucifix in a cup and then urinated in it, then took a picture of it and posted it in art museums and was awarded $20,000 for it. 5,000 of them from the National Endowment of the Arts. You understand the significance of promoting repulsive, meaningless art and protecting it. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity, calling them censorship, and a violation of free speech and free press. That has been accomplished. The Supreme Court in Jacobellis versus Ohio redefined obscenity. There is no obscenity laws anymore. Porn is free speech. They're now both protected because of their goal of, we don't want to censor anybody. Really? Break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography and obscenity in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. How many of you remember the first cuss word in a movie? Remember what movie that was? Gone with the Wind. One word. Frankly, Scarlett, I don't give a... I'm not going to say that word. When I was a boy, I would wait for the preacher to cuss, and that would be the message I would remember. I challenge you to find any modern movie without vulgarity, obscenity, profanity. Mission accomplished. How many of you heard about Cuties? I didn't want to advertise it because I don't want you to know about Cuties, but it's an example. Cuties was a series that came out by Netflix that basically glorified the sexualization of 11-year-old girls. Present homosexuality, degeneracy, and promiscuity, free sex, as normal, natural, and healthy. Remember the 60s? Make love, not war. 1987, I think it was the group ACT UP. I think they're the ones that sponsored it. This is the group that would take over church services. They would throw condoms during Mass. They would use disgusting methods to try to insult people of faith. And it wasn't working. So they hired some Harvard graduates, Kirk, who was a researcher in neuropsychiatry, and Madsen, who was a PR consultant. They hired them and said, we want you to help us change the face of the gay movement. And they did. They wrote the article, The Overhauling of Straight America. You can Google it, you can read it. And that later grew into a book, After the Ball. The first order of business in their article is the desensitization of American public concerning gays and gay rights. Notice what they said. To desensitize the public is to help them view homosexuality with indifference instead of with keen emotion. What are they saying? 1987, how did the average American view a gay pride parade? How did the average American feel about the gay agenda? Well, according to their own article, keen emotion. Was that emotion positive or negative? Negative. That's why they were hired. They wanted to change the way people felt. And this is how they started. This is the first point. Ideally, we would have straights register differences in sexual preferences the way they register differences taste for ice cream or sports game. This is a quote. No big deal. By almost any study you look at, they've marvelously succeeded. In the 70s, a number of American people who felt favorably towards the gay agenda, very low. 2020s, over half. Mission accomplished. Infiltrate the churches. Replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible, emphasize the need for intellectual maturity, which doesn't need a religious crutch. I was involved in a conference call this week from some senators and Republicans in Washington, or not Republicans, senators and congressmen in Washington. And one of the speakers was George Barna, the researcher. And I've shared with you before his latest research, and he's done this for decades, about a biblical world value, a biblical worldview. And it's gone like this over the last couple of decades. Currently, it's 6%. That I knew. What I didn't know is what he shared. He said, when we survey people and we ask them, 54% of the Americans we survey think they have a biblical worldview. They would identify themselves as Christians who think biblically. When we ask specific question, that number drops to 6%. When you go younger generations, baby boomers, I'm thinking it was 13%, Gen X, maybe 11%, millennials, 4%. We're losing. We're losing the cultural concept of the foundational values of America. Eliminate prayer or any, no, don't miss this. 1958, eliminate prayer or any phrase of religious expressions. You can't have the Ten Commandments in school. The Supreme Court said, if you have a picture of the Ten Commandments on the school and they had any effect, it might be that students might read them. And if they read them, they might venerate or obey them. And that is not permissible. So they removed the Ten Commandments from public schools. Notice how, 1958, this is what he said, this is the plan of the communists. Remove prayer or religion from schools on the grounds that it violates the separation of church and state. The exact phrase the Supreme Court used 4 years later. If you ask the average college graduate, where is the phrase separation of church and state? They say it's in the Constitution. It is not in the Constitution. Which is part of the brainwashing of America. Discredit the American Constitution by calling it inadequate, old-fashioned, out of step with modern needs, hinders cooperation between nations on a worldwide basis. This is yesterday a screenshot. Hoover Institute, our outdated Constitution. Why is the nation so poorly governed? Basically because we're following a Constitution that doesn't work. And may I say, they're right. It was John Adams who wrote, our Constitution is written for a moral and religious people, and it is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. That's why they want to attack morality and religion. You want to know who the director of the Hoover Institute is? Condoleezza Rice. By the way, she's Republican. She was the security advisor and the Secretary of State under George Bush. So these issues are not political. Both parties, remember, infiltrate one or more political parties. Discredit the American founding fathers, present them as selfish aristocrats who had no concern for the common man. Did we see that happen this year? Portland erects a statue in honor of Antifa rioters who tore down statues. I don't know if you can see that. What does that look like right there? Iwo Jima, the Marine Monument. But instead of hoisting the American flag, what are these patriots doing? Tearing down statues. Unbelievable, but predicted. Belittle all forms of American culture, discourage the teaching of American history. Mission accomplished. When I was in school in the 70s, Janis Joplin got more pages in American history than George Washington. Historical revisionists. Can we say the 1619 Project? If you don't know about that, you need to find out about it because it's school curriculum in many cities. Critical race theory, also school curriculum in many schools. Support any socialist movement to give centralized control over any part of the culture. Education, social agency, welfare programs, mental health clinics. Eliminate the House Committee on Un-American Activities. That was the one McCarthy was involved in. That was eliminated. In other words, they had a House Committee that would research government agencies who were undermining American principles. That was eliminated. Discredit and dismantle the FBI. Infiltrate and gain control of the unions. Infiltrate, gain control of big business. Transfer some of the powers of arrest from the police to social agencies. Who would have thought that that would be the calling cry of America? But it is. Treat all behavioral problems as psychiatric disorders, which no one but psychiatrists could understand or treat. Why? Because who controls the education? Dominate the psychiatric profession and use mental health laws as a means of gaining coercive control over those who oppose communist goals. Psychiatry remains a bulwark. Listen, I know whereof I speak. When I got my PhD and I started pursuing my licenses, I started to get a licensed professional counselor certification, and I was warned, thankfully, that the American Psychiatric Association that sponsors that, I would fall under their ethics, which means if I said anything against homosexuality or transgenderism, even though it's in the diagnostic and statistic manuals as gender dysphoria, but if I did not toe the party line, I could be sued. The APA has been infiltrated. 1973, the American Psychiatric Association annual meeting was taken over by groups like ACT UP. And they took control, literally, of the moderator, took the microphone and said, we being the gay agenda, we are declaring war on you. If you do not change your position about homosexuality, which, by the way, in 1973 was considered what? A disorder. If you do not change your position, we will harass you, we will go to your homes, we will boycott anybody that gives to you. 1973, guess what happened? That's exactly what the APA did. Did they do it after any research? No. Why did they do it? Got tired of the terrorism. And so, mission accomplished. Discredit the family as an institution. Encourage promiscuity and easy divorce. There were no, what is it called? No-fault divorces in 1958. Now, they're everywhere. Obama administration, when President Obama became the president, there was a law on the book called the Defense of Marriage Act that Bill Clinton actually signed into law because there was already movement to try to redefine marriage. When President Obama, he couldn't change the law, so the first thing he did is told his Attorney General, do not defend DOMA. Any state that sues the federal government, don't defend it. What that did, of course, all of a sudden, that was meat to the piranhas in the pool. So there were lawsuits all over the land challenging gay marriage, which, of course, went to the Supreme Court, which basically redefined marriage. 2015. How did our government celebrate that? White House, the day the Supreme Court said, marriage is anything you want it to be. You want to marry your horse? Marry your horse. Mission accomplished. Emphasize the need to raise, don't miss this, raise children away from the negative influence of their parents. Attribute prejudices, mental blocks, retarding of children to suppressive influence of parents. 1958. Outcome-based education, values clarification, critical race theory. Remember Common Core curriculum? When I moved to this community, our community was on the leading edge of Common Core. What was that math program? Huh? IMP. Guys, I was in nuclear engineering. I understood math until my kids brought home their homework. And then I said, where's the formula? They're supposed to teach you the formula before they give you the problem. No, we're supposed to figure it out. I can't tell you how many hours I stayed up till midnight with my kids. Trial and error trying to figure this out. It's not that I didn't understand math. I believe, no, I'm not blaming our teachers, I'm not blaming our schools, but I believe this outcome-based education, flipping even something as non-political as math on its head, was a part of isolating the parents from the students, because the parents couldn't help their kids with homework anymore. Recently, President Obama is pushing for a $200 billion national preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds. Do you know human personality is developed, about 80% developed before you're 6? So whoever has exposure to your young children, forgive the expression, but their little brains are like clay. Create the impression that violence and insurrection are legitimate aspects of the American tradition, that students and special interest groups should rise up and make a united force to solve the economic, political, or social problems. Have we seen that happen? In spades. BLM co-founder proudly describes her and her fellow Black Lives organizers as Marxists. We are trained Marxists. Quote, we are super versed on ideological theories. And I think what we really tried to do is build a movement consistent with those theories. Last year, BLM received more than $90 million in corporate donations. Big business. Where'd that money go? 71% of it goes to their salaries, benefits, and consulting fees for its labor. BLM co-founder, I practice Marxism by getting rich and supporting my family. Doesn't that seem a contradiction? Did you hear about the 4 mansions she bought? Did you hear she stepped down recently? I heard last night a video interview in which she condemned Israel as an imperialistic problem that needs to be removed. Internalize the Panama Canal, just put that there because we all know what happened. Repeal the Connelly Reservation. This is the only one of the list of 45 that has not been done yet. The Connelly Reservation basically says U.S. law is supreme. We will not be governed by the UN, or will we? If this gets removed, it would give the world court jurisdiction over American issues. We're moving in this direction. The UN, OSCE, has been monitoring U.S. elections since 2000. This is a quote. As a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, why is America a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe? Well, we are. And because we are obligated to invite international electoral observers. Moving in that direction. This is a freebie. Alger Hiss. You want an interesting read? Read about him. He was the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on International Organization. That was the convention that formed the UN. He was involved in the State Department under FDR. He has a long history of deeply embedded in American State Department. He was convicted for being a communist spy while working for the American government. But what was his coup d'etat? What was his achievement? Getting America as part of the United Nations. And the man who did that was convicted of being a Russian spy. So what's the big deal? What's the big deal? Why the Red Scare, preacher? Communism is responsible for more than 100 million murders in the 20th century. How many of you knew that? How many people did Hitler have killed? Tell me the number. 6 million. We're taught that, aren't we? I guess, are you kids in school still taught about the Holocaust? 6 million. I was taught that. I was never taught that Russia and China has killed 200 million. Why not? Why not? We're taught to abhor Adolf Hitler and the 6 million he killed. But we're taught it's okay for China to give grants of $1 billion to Harvard University, and many of the main universities are, it's okay. Snuggle up to China. The reality is communism is far more evil than Nazism, but our kids aren't taught that. Not only is communism responsible for over 100 million deaths, this movement towards dethroning God and enthroning government is setting the stage for what God told us 2,000 years ago was going to happen. Revelation 13. He being a world leader, he will cause all to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, that no man might buy or sell, see the economic indications, save he that had the mark. Here is wisdom. We're studying this on Wednesday nights. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of man. 666. I don't believe that mark is going to be 666. What is 666? In the Bible, 7 is the number of perfection. 6 is the number of man. 6 symbolizes the deification of man. Wasn't that Satan's first invitation to Eve? If you defy God, you will become like gods. You will determine your own good and evil. The 3-666 is based on the 3 unholy trinity of the Revelation period. The dragon of Revelation 12, the Antichrist of Revelation 13, and the false prophet. The dragon is symbolic of God the Father. The Antichrist is symbolic, a counterfeit of Christ, and the false prophet is symbolic of the Holy Spirit, only he is the unholy spirit. So, what do? Psalm 11, in the Lord I put my trust. How say you to my soul, flee as a bird to your mountain? This is written 3,000 years ago. And even then, there were people who were telling David, don't get involved. Nothing to see here. Stay out of it. You don't want the problems. Don't voice your opinion. You'll be canceled or you'll be threatened. Flee as a bird. Just stay away from the conflict. Lo, the wicked bend their bow. They make ready their arrow upon the string that they may privily shoot at the upright in heart. If the foundations be destroyed, what can the righteous do? I know that this has been an exhausting list. All I want you to get out of this is in 1958, this was public. And all of it except for one has become a part of our life. You tell me that there's not powers and people dimming the light switch in America. Romans, Paul says, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of our sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed. What does that look like? The night is far spent. It means time's running out, folks. The day is at hand, the day of the Lord, perhaps. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness. Let's clean the junk. Isn't it interesting they call it brainwashing? It is exactly the opposite. We need to wash our brains. Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you might know, recognize what is the good and acceptable, perfect will of God. The night is far spent, the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness, and let us put on the armor of light. Proverbs 4 says, the chapter on wisdom we talked about last week. Ponder the path of your feet. Recognize which direction you're moving. And let all your ways be established. The word is kun, means be prepared, be directed. Prepared by whom? Directed by whom? I don't know if they'll publicize this service. I understand it's kind of crazy to the average American. But our kids are being prepared and directed. By whom? Our society is being prepared and directed. By whom? Our steps are being prepared and directed. By whom? Proverbs chapter 3 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he'll direct your steps. Who will you trust to establish your ways? You pull it all back. Doesn't matter what the names or the faces look like. There's two powers at work. The thief, who comes to steal, to kill, and destroy, and the good shepherd, who gives his life for the sheep. Which will you follow? Let's pray. Father, as we face the memorial of tomorrow, is perhaps, or at least I hope, we'll spend some time reflecting on those who gave their very lives in defense of liberty and principles upon which our country was founded and which have made us great. While we don't want to detract from their sacrifice, I would ask that you would help each of us, as you warned us in Peter, you warned us in Romans, to wake up, to recognize the night is far spent. A lot of things have been done in the dark. Help us, Lord, to have discernment. Help us to recognize that to some degree we've all been educated and influenced by some of these forces and some of these factors. The real issue isn't who's going to lead our country, a Democrat or Republican or even a communist. The real issue is who are we going to follow as your people? While we'll be affected by choices our nation makes, and we are, we will be eternally affected by the choices we make individually. If there's someone here this morning or someone under the sound of my voice, perhaps watching later, who has never consciously chosen you, never acknowledged their own brokenness, their own sin, and the penalty that that sin demands, that justice demands, would you help them to recognize that, Lord? But then reflect on the fact that Jesus paid that penalty for them on Calvary's cross. And because your justice was satisfied, you offer them the gift of forgiveness, eternal life, and invite them to become a part of your family. We ask that your Spirit would do what my words cannot, penetrate hearts. In Jesus' name, amen.
Please stand.